All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're calling in from. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Apologies for the slight delay. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Amanda Zink, and I'm a program officer on the Technology and Democracy team at the International Republican Institute. We're really excited to hold this conversation on the importance of modernizing and digitizing legislative processes, with a really particular focus in this event on how technology companies are seeking to support legislatures in their modernization efforts. We're really happy to host this event through the Design for Democracy Coalition, otherwise known as D4D, for those of you who aren't too familiar. And it serves as a really wonderful coordination mechanism between democracy organizations and technology companies. So it really is the perfect mechanism for this conversation. So in just a moment, we'll jump into a conversation with Microsoft and Facebook representatives, as well as with a digitization expert working in the Israeli parliament, to talk about the importance of legislative modernization and available tools and support that Microsoft and Facebook can provide to support those modernization efforts. But before we jump into it, I just want to share a couple of quick thoughts on the rationale behind why we think this conversation is so important. So IRI works in over 100 countries around the world, supporting those who protect and advance democracy. And really core to that mission are the elected bodies who hold executive branches to account and who ensure that government actually serves the people. And when COVID forced work online, it became clear to IRI across the countries we were working in that legislatures were not only absolutely essential for an effective response to the pandemic, but were also uniquely ill-equipped to move their operations online. Legislatures were facing barriers like navigating rules requiring in-person votes, managing security concerns, and not to mention struggling through different layers of organizational bureaucracy. So the pandemic has shown that many legislatures were at risk of being unable to function at precisely the point when they were needed the most to respond, with legislative operations really in a near standstill. So in response to that, and over the last nearly 2 years now, hard to believe, IRI has worked with legislatures to support adjustments to operations, and we've watched best practices and innovative adaptations of digital tools emerge from around the world in really amazing ways. We've worked to capture many of these lessons learned, best practices, and useful tools in our recently released playbook called Going Digital, a Playbook for Legislatures, which I would like to point you all to as a user-friendly resource for legislatures and staff and CSOs who are really helping to try to navigate the beginning stages of digitization within a legislature, either local or national. But in addition to watching these legislatures successfully adapt and innovate, we also saw a gap between the resources and support that consumer technology companies like Facebook and Microsoft can provide, and the awareness of those available resources on the part of legislatures that need them. So we're really seeing this conversation as an opportunity to not only discuss the best practices for and the importance of digitizing legislative operations, but also as an opportunity to really connect legislatures to the available resources and tools that are on offer to assist in streamlining their work. So with all of that said, and before taking up any more time, I would like to introduce our moderator for this event, Amy Steddert, who has a strong background in both the technology and social media world, as well as in the governance space. Amy is currently a director and senior advisor at IRI, where she leads our technology and democracy programming. But I am sad to say that this is Amy's last day with IRI. Heartbroken, really, to say that. So this is an extra special treat for you all to join us in really what is her last event in her capacity as a senior advisor for our team. So with that, Amy, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I am also heartbroken to be leaving. This has just been the most wonderful job to work with people like Amanda. I will start by just saying a huge thanks to Amanda. The playbook, which I just linked in the chat, is just a truly excellent resource, and it really sort of demonstrates her expertise and all of the work that she's been doing over the last few years on this tremendously important issue. I also just want to say thanks and flag how many other people were involved in developing this playbook. Many of them are on this panel here today. And also a huge thanks as well to the D4D Coalition, and particularly to our sister organization, NDI, and Chris Dutton and Evan Summers, who helped with the cybersecurity portion of the playbook and have developed a sort of complementary playbook on cybersecurity for parliamentarians as well, which is well worth looking at. So again, tremendous thanks to Amanda for doing this, just a brilliant project through and through. So we're here with an excellent panel. And I am very excited to present all of them. I'll just do a quick run through of bios so that we can get that out of the way and you can hear how brilliant all of these people that you're going to be listening to are. And then I'm going to hand it over to each of them to answer a couple of key questions. So first up, we have Robin, who is the Deputy Director of the website of the Knesset. It's the unicameral legislature of Israel. She's concentrated primarily on the integration of technology, design, and content. After moving from Miami to Israel, she began working at the Jewish Agency for Israel, and after building a website from the ground up in that role, she was recruited by the Knesset in 1997 to help develop their website. So she's really been working on this for a long while. Throughout her career, she's developed deep expertise in integrating user experience and human-centered design practices in government and technology. After that, I'm going to introduce Dave Leichtman. He's a strategist for Microsoft's Democracy Forward initiative. I should also flag that he's been an early and long-standing supporter of the Design for Democracy, so huge thanks for that, including of this particular initiative. So as part of Microsoft's social responsibility efforts, he works with election officials in the US and internationally to address tech and security needs. He also leads the company's internal coordination around US election security and readiness, as well as international election strategy. And then finally, I'm going to introduce Eva Giordarini. I hope I said that right. Eva is the head of state and local government outreach at Meta, which was formerly Facebook, for folks who haven't been following all of the ways that this has blown up in the news recently. Her team helps elected officials, campaigns, and governments, including state and local elections offices across the US, use the company's platforms to better connect with voters and constituents. Before Meta, Eva worked on political campaigns, including Carly Fiorina's presidential campaign. So first of all, Robin, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk a bit about why modernization of services was considered so important by the Israeli parliament, what your general approach has been, and some of the best practices that you've learned to make the digitization of services and processes effective?
Okay, yes, I will answer all those questions. Thank you, Amy. One of the things I would like to start with is to be able to say that I've been working in the Knesset for a long time. I've been working since 1997, and I cannot even imagine a time or a situation that the Knesset's parliamentary procedures were not digitized. Mike, can we put the computerization screen on, please, if you hear me? In any case, yeah, thank you. Okay, so I drew a little bit of a mind map. This first one I titled computerization, and the second will be webinization or webization. Computerization, what do I mean by this? I simply mean introducing computers into the Knesset as part or as a major part or as a completely necessary part of running the parliament. And so before my time, okay, even almost, well, yeah, when I was a kid, I suppose, the very first computers that were brought into the Knesset actually happened in the late 1970s. And we're talking about, again, of course, not a PC, we're talking about a computer that was the size of a room. It was a mainframe. And there were terminals on many employees' desks, which, you know, again, today it's a screen, so it kind of looks like, I suppose, what a PC would have looked like. By the time I joined the Knesset, quite a few people already had personal computers. And way back then, around the later 1990s, Microsoft Office, and I'm not here to promote anyone necessarily, I'm telling facts as they are. Microsoft Office and other Microsoft products were an extremely, extremely large part of the digitizing of the Knesset, of the parliamentary procedures, and making sure that things run smoothly in the parliament, in the Knesset. one of the main things that I suppose was seen as the most important part of digitization in the Knesset was really to reduce human error. Okay, the more papers you have running around and the more people you have writing on these papers, and then on top of that, even the more people you have typing into systems, the more room for human error. And one of the most important, again, we're talking about computerizing right now inside the Knesset. We're not talking about yet, publicizing this outside, but within the parliament, you want to make sure that there are no mistakes. So what happens is if you have one entry place of the information, okay, one entry point where somebody types in the name of a bill, and that same name of that bill gets forwarded and triggered and forwarded again, and that same name doesn't change. But what happens if, let's say, they decide that they have to put a comma somewhere inside the name of that bill, then they put it back once and it gets changed automatically across the board. This reduces the possibility of human error across the board. And again, I cannot even imagine a time in the Knesset before digitization. It doesn't even seem possible. So it's been there all along, and the Knesset has never, ever been scared of new technologies, has never been scared to look and find answers to technical problems. I would like to, when I mentioned about Microsoft, one of the most important elements of having a large company such as Microsoft put their products into our parliament, the main issue there was really to make sure that the Knesset developed a proper relationship with Microsoft. And having a proper relationship, that simply means that as soon as there are issues, as soon as there are problems, the Knesset needs answers and fixes right away. And over the years, if I can tell you that the Knesset is still using Microsoft for many, many things inside of the Knesset, then obviously that relationship is working. And that is something that is really important, that human level. I'm going to discuss that later on in one of the later questions that I think will be coming my way. Mike, can we put the other screen on, please? Once a parliament, in our experience, once a parliament has its internal affairs in order, okay, now it's time really to take the internal affairs and put them out. What does that mean, put them out? Really give them out to the world. Now, a word about, first of all, the fact that the website of the Knesset opened up January 1997. It was the third public body website in the state of Israel at the time. One of the first parliaments around the world to open up a website back then. And one of the issues I would like to discuss for a second, if you see on here, I have this little bubble here that says transparency versus info equals power. Once upon a time, okay, the idea that he who holds all of the information basically has the most power. And I can even give an example. In the Knesset, in all the way up until the early 90s, if I wanted to read the protocol of a meeting of a committee, I had to approach the committee, a phone call, a letter, and say, I would like to read the protocol from, the meeting that happened on March 23rd last year. I need to see that protocol. And then it would be discussed in the committee whether or not to let me, the citizen, okay, I want to, again, this is supposed to be public record, but they discussed whether or not I can read it. I have to come to the Knesset. I can read the protocol. I can take notes on it. I cannot photocopy it, okay, and then I leave. That was the extent of the transparency back then, because information was power. And not that long later, we're talking about, now we're 30 years later, but even 10 years after that, all right, parliaments had started to come to this new magic word called transparency. And everybody is now tripping over themselves to try to figure out, how can we get all the information out to the public as accessibly, as quickly, and as user-friendly as possible. And if you ask me, that's actually a brilliant transformation. And the idea of the webization of the Knesset really is to get all of the information out to the public in the best possible way. And if you see my green lines on the mind map are basically the development of the different parts of our way to get to the public. And it's pretty much started as most websites. Okay, let's put our information up online so people won't keep making the phone calls to hassle us about the same information. So let's just get it online so everybody can see it. And then it started to become more interactive, where people can contact the Knesset about certain issues. Some back and forth things, whether you have games or riddles for kids, or all different kinds of ways that they were two-directional. But that was, and I'm talking about two-directional, was kind of before its time, before social media. The next step was really to move to social media. We opened up a Facebook page back in 2011, and followed by Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, I think was before the Instagram, the YouTube channel. And we are basically out there. Now, the idea of the social media here, by the way, not like the Knesset members or the members of parliament who want to connect with the public for their own campaign, for their own, pushing their own agenda. Our idea was to reach the public and say, please come to our site and take a look at all this amazing information that we have for you. What we will call raw information. Raw information is really, again, you're talking about protocols, the bills, the laws, the minutes of the plenum meetings. And then after social media, I would say, again, around the time of social media, we also have a news-based approach to try to make it more accessible to the public, rather than just giving the law or the bill that was discussed in the committee. There will be a press release that tells in human terms more what actually happened. I'm going to finish this presentation here by the last thing on the bottom of the last little bubble on the bottom of my slide here, where it says there is no. Now, when I first started working we started working on the website back in '97. Okay, technologies were really in their infancy, web technologies. And if someone said to me, in a few years, you're going to be able to take all of the information that's on the internal system of the Knesset and recreate it for the public, and they can do search, and they can do this, and they can do that. And again, it seems so far-fetched, but I learned from a programmer that worked with us at the time. He says there's nothing is impossible. Sometimes you might have to throw a lot of money at it, you might have to throw a lot of energy and time, but there is no situation that you can't do. Okay, something that you want, something that you visualize, it can be done. All right, so that's what I would like to leave everybody with, and know that we're dreaming all the time. We are thinking all the time what we can do better, how we can reach more citizens who, in the end of the day, the Knesset members are really put there, and the Knesset platform is really put there for their use, not for mine. I mean, me as a citizen, yes, but I'm there to serve the public, and we're trying to figure out all the time better ways to do that. And that's it.
Thanks so much, Robin. What an incredibly inspiring example to start us off with. I really appreciate it. Just before this, I was in a session on countering digital authoritarianism, and the argument that I kept making is, the way that we do that is we have an optimistic vision about how we use technology to deliver democratic principles better, and that has to be core to what we're doing. And Robin, it really sounds like your work has been doing that. So thank you. It's really fantastic, an inspiring example. So Eva, I'm going to come to you next and ask about meta properties, so Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all of which are really critical tools for parliamentarians who have been trying to communicate with their citizens and also hear more from their citizens about what they're looking for. I know that Meta has worked quite hard to make sure that their services are better suited for democratic actors and for the unique needs that a legislature might have. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those, and particularly with reference to the fact that a lot of the places where IRI and other members of the D4D coalition work are places where Facebook is the internet, where WhatsApp is the primary mechanism for communication, and so this is such a critical piece of democratic infrastructure. So over to you.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me, everyone. I'm excited to be here and thrilled to talk about this. This is sort of my sweet spot, is the intersection of how we can better serve governments with all of our platforms here at Meta. Our mission is really about bringing people together and building communities. And as deeply corny as I know it sounds, strong communities are civically engaged communities. So this is really just key to sort of how we think about our platforms writ large. And when it comes to supporting governments and parliamentarians, I really think about our support in sort of two separate buckets. The first is sort of coming up with like fundamental product changes and scaled solutions via products that can better help parliamentarians and governments get out their messages on our platform, especially like you said, given their unique constraints. And we'll come back to that in a second. But I think the second piece of this is just simply providing like overall good customer service and support for our platforms. We have several of them. They can be complicated. And I think that all of the folks that work on our teams that support governments and politicians came from the world of government and politics and understand that it is inherently a resource constrained world, right? There's never enough time or money or staff power to go around. People who are working on getting out messages on digital and social media platforms also tend to have 7 other jobs, are incredibly busy. And so anything that we can do to help sort of provide support and ease the way in this space, I think is incredibly important just from a sort of basic customer service standpoint. And we know that particularly for governments, that resource constrained environment makes it all the more important that we can provide that support. In recent years, we've actually created a government, politics, and nonprofit concierge service that works across the world on Facebook, and is sort of a set of customer support agents that are trained very specifically in the needs and concerns of government and politics, and can sort of work across language barriers and time zones to really help folks resolve problems that they're having across Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and sort of our other platforms, which I think has been a really great step for us to be able to sort of support broadly across the scale. And we're always working on expanding that in terms of languages and other things to make sure that we can really get that good customer support to all of the folks who are using these platforms for sort of democratic good here. So I think that's sort of the customer support piece of this, which I do think is critical. But the other piece, and a piece I think my team spends a lot of time thinking about, is how can we make fundamental changes on our platforms to make them better work for great work that government is doing. I think COVID is a great example of this. We worked incredibly closely with ministries of health across the world to run sort of top of feed reminders on Facebook, helping to drive people to initially just basic health information, but then later on how to sign up for a vaccine. We helped them create things like profile frames to help sort of drive vaccine adoption in their countries, created resources with international agencies as well as countries, and even down to the state and local level in certain countries, helping to sort of debunk myths on the platform. And I sort of think of all about that is we were just coming up with all sorts of ways we could put government information top of feed for folks. Health agencies across the world were sort of our trusted and authoritative source of information, and we were just trying to come up with different product ways to sort of show that to everyone and really help amplify their messages. One of the tools I'm really excited about that we came up with is called COVID announcements. This was a tool that we rolled out in the US and in India, and are looking to roll out in a couple of other countries. But it basically, for countries in particular that had a more decentralized response to COVID, where state or regional governments or even local governments were in charge of vaccination programs rather than at the federal level, we were able to give those state and local governments basically a broadcast tool, this announcements tool on Facebook, that would allow them to send a notification to all of their constituents on the platform with this sort of critical information. And so I think that announcements tools like that, particularly that we can put directly in the hands of governments that allow them to talk to their constituents without having to necessarily come through us first, is something we're really excited about. Giving those democratic and free governments that sort of broadcast mechanism is a great way to sort of meet their constituents where they already are and give them these really important messages. I think like that, live Q&As, well, not a tool designed specifically for governments. I think were used exceptionally well by governments, particularly during the pandemic, and particularly parliamentarians. Great ways to sort of go on a live video and take questions in real time from the comment section was a way that people really helped stay connected with their constituents during during the pandemic and make sure that they got their feedback. But I also am really excited about this tool moving forward. I think it's particularly powerful for people who maybe live or cover a region that's rural. And so it's really hard to go out and meet everyone in person. It's a great way to sort of connect and spend more time with constituents in a way that makes it a little bit more accessible. When it comes to elections related work, I think we also really see our mission here is to help amplify the election commission in a country's messaging, whether it's helping them build a WhatsApp bot to get out information in a country that is WhatsApp first, whether it's running top of feed reminders with their important messages on Facebook and Instagram. We want to make sure we're helping to get out that sort of critical information about how to engage in a democracy, and that we're really amplifying those trusted government sources of information. And then sort of as we do more of this work to really amplify the great work that governments are doing, I think I would be remiss to say that one of the things that we worry about the more and more we amplify government work is making sure that we keep governments and government employees safe as they're using our platforms to sort of get good information out. It is a personal battle in my life to try to get people to turn on two-factor authentication. And so just a personal plea here, if you're on the call and you do not have two-factor authentication turned on any of your personal digital accounts, please do. But I think we're trying to think about this sort of in a scaled way, because people are really, and including people whose job it is to do high security government work, are really remiss to sort of give up the accessibility options that come with turning on TwoFac. And so I think some of the programs we're rolling out are ways that we can sort of enroll anyone in the civic and government space in a country in mandatory two-factor authentication, extra bullying and harassment protections, sort of all of these protections. And we call it our Facebook Protect program. That's designed broadly for civic actors, but particularly for governments and parliamentarians, to make sure that as folks move online more, we're doing everything we can to sort of keep their accounts safe and secure and keep them safe as they're using our platforms. So these are just sort of some of the ways we're starting to think about this space, but we actually have whole product teams whose whole job it is to think about how to better connect government institutions and government elected people and their constituents. And so we're really excited to keep doing more work in this space. It's one of our favorite places to get to explore and help build out. So excited to be here. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks for that really excellent and thorough presentation. I have posted a link in the chat here with a lot of the resources that Eva referenced. So feel free to go through that. There's a lot there. And I'm sure one of the things that we really try to do with D4D and IRI is really reflect the needs of the grassroots. And so if there's a product or a service that you think could be improved or tweaked, please do feel free to get in touch with us or post it in the chat. Or get in touch with whoever. I think we all want to make these products as useful as we possibly can. Just to echo the plea for turning on two-factor authentication, it would help all of us sleep better at night if you would. A friend of mine blew up on Twitter over the last week or so on a very controversial topic, and I realized last night that I was so panicked about the fact that she didn't have two-factor on that I was like not even proud of her, because I was like, please turn it on. So yeah, turn it on before you blow up, because you're all very impressive and people deserve to hear what you're going to say. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dave, who I think got the best introduction possible from Robin earlier, although he swears he didn't pay her. Dave, so Facebook is really, and Facebook properties have really been sort of the communications layer that a lot of governments and parliamentarians have relied on, but Microsoft has been the office infrastructure, right? And that over the last couple of years with COVID, I think escalated very rapidly. As I think is detailed in the brilliant playbook that Amanda put together and linked earlier in the chat, parliaments have really specific needs when it comes to office infrastructure. And so, Office 365, which is developed for everybody, all of us are using it, is not necessarily designed for what a parliamentary system looks like and the security features that are needed and how processes work. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which Microsoft has been trying to meet that need, what you've seen, the innovations that you've seen adopted, and particularly, I think, again, on this two-factor thing with reference to cybersecurity, where it's quite evident that parliaments and legislatures just have very specific security needs. And I know that Microsoft has given a lot of thought to what those are and how they can be met.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. I actually want, before I say anything, I want to give a heap of praise to Amy. My team at Microsoft has been working with Amy for years, and we really value her work and her contribution to IRI. And I'm sure you guys are going to miss her as much as we are. But I'm excited for what's next for you. So thank you for your service.
Thanks. That's very kind. We'll stay in touch.
And as Amy said, I swear I didn't pay Robin. We value our work with the Israeli government and the Knesset. So thank you. Yeah, so also two-factor authentication on everything. Yes, do that. There's a website called twofactorauth.org that you can go to that literally tells you how to turn it on for every service you could possibly use. So go there and do that, and do it for start with your email, do it for everything else. Let's talk about digital transformation. So I'm going to rewind a year and a half to when our CEO, Satya Nadella, was being interviewed by one of the tech trades. And he said, we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. So that was at the beginning of the pandemic. You can imagine a year and a half later, when things are still going on, how much digital transformation we've seen now. Essentially overnight, hundreds of thousands, millions of people were sent home, right? Operations had to resume from home. Government agencies shifted practices to support distributed workforces, which is nightmarish in a pre-pandemic situation, but we've had 2 years at this point to kind of adjust processes and adapt to that. And so, some of this work was long overdue. I'll say it was a forced revolution, right? We've had 25 years of the internet. A lot of this could have come along, but we kind of were forced into it, into a lot of digital transformation journey being happening in a very short amount of time. We at Microsoft were I don't want to say we were unprepared, we were underprepared, just as all the other companies were, for the sheer magnitude. I mean, we had orders of magnitude more usage in our cloud services overnight during the pandemic. And so we added huge swaths of capacity, as did Amazon, as did Google, as did Facebook, as did Twitter. It was a necessary thing, right? The cool thing is the digital transformation journey that we've been out there advocating for among governments and frankly everybody got a jump start. Virtualizing processes is more efficient. It allows for more collaboration. It allows for inclusion and accessibility, which are important, right? It saves money, it saves time, it saves on active management, which I think a lot of governments are used to, kind of holding on to their own tech assets as they view it as a necessity, but then they spend so much time patching and actively managing security and actively managing compliance and things like that, that when pushed off to a third party, like Microsoft, like Google and others, saves a lot of time. There's, at this point, I mean, I think we all recognize it, unprecedented security threats, right? Like most of these small governments anyway are not equipped to handle the threats that are out there, like the constant barrage of ransomware, like sophisticated attacks from foreign state actors. And that's helped jumpstart the process of enhanced security, a move to the model that we call zero trust, which is essentially doing away with the old 80s, 90s, early aughts model of like, I have a network, everything inside that network is secure. If you're in that network, you're cool. You can access anything, to saying, you know what? I don't trust anybody anymore. You have to authenticate every time you come into the network. Everything you access is on-demand security. And so that's a model that I think has really gained popularity during the pandemic, which is a very good thing, right? That from a security perspective, that is exactly what we want to see out there. Just to say it though, this revolution hasn't been evenly distributed, right? We see, especially among smaller countries where internet capacity is not top notch, we've seen them have difficulty virtualizing work. Governments, voting bodies, and I know Amy mentioned this before, discovered their processes were unique and ill-suited to virtualization in some cases, especially draconian voting procedures, I'll just say that, among legislatures. So they ran into process barriers as much as technical ones in digital transformation. And so I think legislatures have been slower to modernize. I don't want to say modernize, but transform processes digitally than some other government entities. And I'll also just, I mean, I'm trying to be honest here and mention the elephants in the room. There's a trust factor, right? Like, and I won't say it's specific to Microsoft, although I have at an event with IRI and NDI, I had our cloud referred to as the colonizer's cloud, which I thought was a very interesting. I've personally never colonized anything, but I understand that the trust factor against the US and European run companies is definitely a real thing, right? Especially in the developing world. And data privacy and sovereignty are big issues, right? There's been a move among especially more sophisticated European democracies toward what we call like cloud sovereignty, right? So we want to virtualize everything, we move to the cloud, but all those cloud assets still have to live inside our country, right? Germany has been the spearhead behind this, and in the EU. But we're a big company; we can work around that. We've Brazil's had that in place for, I don't know, since the internet existed, 25 years, and so our first data center in Latin America was in Brazil for obvious reasons. To speak to some of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years, or the last 2 years of the pandemic specifically, heavy adoption of Teams, right? I mean, we had Teams. I think Microsoft rolled out Teams just right time, right place. It was our transformation from Skype to more collaborative environment. It just hit at the right time. Microsoft had a trusted name, trusted brand, and Teams adoption went through the roof, right? Orders of magnitude more. I'll also say Cisco's WebEx saw the same growth. Zoom, maybe less so among governments. Zoom was really popular in the private sector in the last couple of years. Their adoption has, they've insane growth, right? But among governments, possibly more so with Teams and Cisco. Virtualization of citizen participation options. And I think this is really important. This is because of the problems I mentioned before with legislatures. I think the thing that we've seen the most is growth in that, right? In the ability for citizens to participate in government processes. San Francisco rolled out this beautiful new citizen participation portal that they should be incredibly proud of, because it really changes the whole game in the way that people can participate in their local government. In some cases, we saw legislatures moving voting processes online, not elections, not advocating for elections online. I'm saying the actual voting mechanisms of legislatures. We even did a big a project with the US House of Representatives, the Democratic Caucus, when they were electing their leadership after the 2020 election, so that they voted virtually. They voted virtually in person, which sounds weird, but it was basically a big test of, could we do this remotely in the future if we had to? So they use a secure app developed by our group. And I think the other big thing that we've seen, especially small governments, US states, is hybrid hearings and committee business, right? Maybe you're not able to do the whole voting procedures for the whole of parliament or the whole of a state legislature online, but we've seen big success with actually taking hearings and small committee business and moving them entirely virtual or into a hybrid setting where some people are in the room, some people are participating remotely. And so from my perspective, and maybe this is a good setup for the rest, I have big questions moving forward, and maybe they're not able to be answered. I don't have any super smart things to say about them, but I'm really curious to know how permanent some of these changes are, right? Whether they get rolled, but hybrid options, especially, a lot of people are already, I think it's strange because we're still in the middle of a Delta wave here in the pandemic, but people are already starting to talk about, let's get these legislatures back together in 2022. Okay. How many of the process changes will stick? I think the most earth-shattering thing we saw in 2020 was that the US House moved to proxy voting. I don't think that survives if the House switches to the Republicans next year. That definitely won't survive. Proxy voting is not popular. And how much of virtualization is actually desirable? I want to pose that to the room generally, especially among citizen participation. It's great to offer options for citizens to participate virtually, and there are inclusion and accessibility considerations there. But how much does it lead to lazy participation? How much does it lead to slacktivist participation? That kind of thing. So those are just kind of the things I'll throw out there as top of my mind as we move forward. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. That was fantastic. I'd love, we have this Q&A section here, but Dave just posed some super interesting questions, and I know we have people here from all around the world. So please do feel free to use the Q&A function, not necessarily just as a Q&A function, but also as a comment to share what you're seeing on the ground elsewhere outside of the US. A couple of points, I think, from what IRI sees. The trajectory of COVID in the US is very different to the trajectory of COVID in a lot of the places that we work. Vaccine distribution is going to take a lot longer. And so I think we're going to see a longer period in which hopefully there's more reliance on virtual and digitization of parliamentary processes. I think that the other thing that's really interesting to watch is how much is it the case that traditional functions and the traditional way that a parliament or legislature works is being digitized, right? Like the voting mechanism, citizen participation through Zoom town halls rather than in-person town halls, versus how much is it being rethought from the basis of first principles, which is what does citizen participation or representative deliberation look like in an era in which everybody can access information and everybody can take part in a conversation, and it's not sort of geographically limited or limited to a number of people. So those are just a couple of things that we are seeing. Please do post questions as well in the chat. I'm going to pose one last question to Eva, Robin, and Dave, but we really love to hear from you. The goal of this is to try and make these resources as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So share your comments and questions in the chat so that we can come to those. So to that point, as I was saying, a lot of parliaments are still in the process of figuring out what digitization should look like, what virtualization should look like. And so the question to all of you is a sort of very tactical one, which is, what are the first steps? What are the resources that parliaments and parliamentarians should be looking at as they embark on this grand adventure of massive complexity, risk, and opportunity? Robin, I'll start with you on that question.
Okay. Before I answer that question, I just want to make one comment about back to Dave and about COVID. By the way, Dave, it's funny, I did not mention in all of my presentation, I didn't even mention the whole COVID thing. The Knesset actually really slipped very almost seamlessly into the COVID situation, where some modifications here and there, and you had the entire parliament working from home. Almost all the committee meetings were virtual, online. However, the Knesset never reached a point where there was virtual remote voting. It never happened in the plenum, the main chamber. Knesset members actually had to come to the Knesset physically in order to vote. Even if they came in having COVID themselves, they were put in an isolation room and they were voting from there. That took place. And by the way, then the Knesset also very seamlessly moved into Teams. All of the meetings and everything was really most of the meetings were happening over Teams when it was internal. They used Zoom for external. Whenever they needed, the committee meetings, for example, were over Zoom, not over Teams, because Teams was used for the internal meetings and Zoom was used when we had to connect to people on the outside. And again, in committee meetings, when you have people from the outside that are invited to, whether, if you want to call it a hearing, that's not really what we call it in Israel, but where people are called to testify, to give their expert opinions, that was all done on Zoom. That's my word about COVID. The Knesset is actually moving back now towards more physical space. Anything that is a physical space for the most part, except for the plenum, which, like I said, it has always been having to be there physically for voting, is still hybrid. Sometimes they choose still to have hybrid meetings for the committees. Whatever. That's the situation that is now in the Knesset. Now back to the question. Okay, we're talking about the technology space and about digitizing parliaments. And I'm going to go way off of that and say, you want technology, you want to digitize, it's the people, okay? If you want, if a parliament anywhere in the world wants to begin a project of digitizing, in the end of the day, it starts with the people, it continues with the people, and then it ends with the people. The technology, you know, sort of weird way, is almost like the cherry on top. If you don't, if there is not some kind of a personal level connection made between the parliament and a company, or even a programmer, or the person that is from the outsource but is sitting in the Knesset or in the parliament, okay? That is, if that doesn't happen, if there is no personal connection that is built, the success can be successful, it can work in the end of the day, it just might take longer, it might take more money, and it might take many more any energy resources. It's critical. It's critical to develop relationships with companies on a personal level. And that's pretty much where I would start. So if, let's say, you're talking about a company such as Microsoft would have, you know, certain products, and then you have what you call the trust factor. Okay, in the end of the day, the only way to get around that trust factor is to build personal relationships between the client, in this case a parliament, and the provider, the service provider, which would be a company. By the way, the same can also go for Facebook or Meta and platforms that they offer for, and again, I'm not, you know, connecting with the parliamentarians directly versus connecting with the parliament itself as a body, as a government body, are really, in the end of the day, two very different things. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's really that connection that's going to make the difference. I would also highly recommend that within the parliament itself, the parliament needs to bring in people who know technology. They don't have to necessarily be the technology experts in the end of the day, but they need to have an idea. And at the same time, the people in the companies that will be serving them have to come in and learn the parliament. They have to really learn, you know, a nice word, I think, in Yiddish, the kishkas. Okay, the kishkas are kind of like the intestines. You need to know the kishkas of how the parliament works in order to be able to come along and say, okay, well, let's, let's make a plan for digitizing. They can't offer a plan if they don't really know how it works. And we've had this, by the way, we've had so much experience with people trying to come along and the other way around. Someone in the Knesset wants to make a new technology project, and they decide, you know what we have in-house is not good enough. Let's go outsource. And again, in this case, meaning outside. Let's go find another company because they do cool stuff, and let's see what they have to say. And every time the website was involved in a project that the Knesset went and looked on the outside. In the end of the day, it was literally all that money was thrown down the toilet, and we had to start over. And we did it much faster and much cheaper in the end of the day because we know how the Knesset works, and they didn't know how the Knesset worked, and it just didn't work. So my recommendation, again, is that the people inside the parliament learn some technology, and they can also provide the interface with the companies, and that the people in the companies learn the parliament and understand how they work, and then connect between those people on a personal level. And so, and by the way, that's not my phone, that's somebody else's phone in the house. Okay, so that's the bottom line. If I have to sum everything up in all of my experience all the years, that's what works. That's it.
It's such an interesting point, Dave. I'm actually going to pose a different question to you, which is, how does that feel on the company side? How do you deal, you know, there's thousands and thousands of government organizations, including parliaments, that you guys have to deal with. How do you manage those relationships? What are you able to do? What aren't you able to do? And how does it scale at a global level?
Sure. So that's an interesting question. I mean, the short answer is we have a massive organization to support. You know, Microsoft is at times the biggest company in the world, right? For better or worse. And we, you know, one of the things we focus on a lot is training resources, and I think that's super important, right? I'll say to your original question and partially answer this one: security, right? I mean, I'll always say that, you know that. But the human process of adopting security is really difficult, right? We can sit here and we can tell everybody to adopt two-factor authentication, but unless we point them to a website like twofactorauth.org where they can learn how to do it, they're not going to do it. It's not even that hard. It's just it's a mindset. It's getting over a small hump. So making sure that there's lots of resources out there, making sure that we're pointing people towards those resources, I think is a big part of what Microsoft does and a big part of the necessary transformation journey. To give the example, I think, one that I saw locally on the first day of school, virtual school last year, Fairfax County, which is the next county over from where I live, they were going virtual. They had all these kids in Zoom on the first day. And Zoom bombing, right? Everybody knew about Zoom bombing back at the beginning of the pandemic. That was the big thing, right? Zoom bombing is not a thing. Zoom bombing is not actually a security hole in Zoom. It's a security hole in the way that you're using Zoom. It's like if Google Docs, you have a link that's anyone can edit if you give them the link. Yeah, anyone can edit if you give them the link, right? If you go out and you email everybody that link, some people are going to get that link that shouldn't have it. That's just not good security. That's not the right way to use it, right? So finally, people started teaching, well, you need to pay for Zoom. You need to individually accredit each person who's coming into the meeting. And that's the zero trust model, right? And so, at first Teams was like, we say, hey, we don't have that problem with Teams. Well, that's because it wasn't the same thing, right? With Teams, it requires you to individually accredit people, which maybe is a good thing. But that's a good example. Like they actually shut down Fairfax County schools for a day while they dealt with a security issue, but it wasn't ever a security issue. It was a training issue. It was making sure that people had the resources and the knowledge available to use it in the proper way. So hopefully that answers that question.
Super, thanks, Dave. So Eva, same question to you. Where would you point people to first who are in the process of digitizing their parliament? What do you think they should do first? But I'm also going to flag a question that came from Natasha at ICNL. I'm going to try and shorten it a little bit so that we're not here for a while because we're running low on time. But how does Meta approach the issue of enhancing government's platform and ability to amplify information that they're sharing versus information from other sources? So for instance, civil society. I think that, for those of us who operate in the democracy assistance business, this is a real issue because in some places, civil society is a lot more trustworthy than is a government in terms of as a source of information. So both what resources would you point people to in a parliament first, and then that question, please. Thank you.
Yes, of course. In terms of resourcing, I actually think, Amy, you might have thrown this link in the doc here, but facebook.com/GPA is just a really great set of just sort of how to build it out from the ground up resources for all of our different platforms. There's also a support link there where you can sort of get automatically connected with someone from our concierge team. So I think that's a great place to start. There are lots of videos, ways to sort of walk through it. But I think in terms of sort of broad advice, my advice is to start on the social media side of the house is to start small and to not have more platforms than you can manage well. I think that sort of with social media, the sky's the limit, depending on the audience you're trying to reach. There are so many different platforms that you could choose to be on. And I feel like I often get asked, particularly as I'm working with sort of incredibly low resource state and local governments here in the US, like, should we have like both a Facebook and an Instagram and a WhatsApp as well? And should we be trying to maintain all these different platforms? And my answer is always, you shouldn't have more platforms than you can regularly maintain and respond to and engage with. It's always better to have fewer platforms and manage each individual one well, and to go sort of step by step in the process rather than to try to do everything and then not really be able to engage or take any of the benefit from it or connect with your constituents because you're doing too many across the board. Obviously, each platform helps you do a little bit of something different, but I think just prioritizing, picking one to start with, expanding to more if you can, but not doing more than you can regularly engage with is really key to sort of setting yourself up long-term for success on these platforms. And then turning to your question about sort of making sure that government isn't the only resource, I couldn't agree more. I realized I was talking primarily about government earlier, but I think particularly in our COVID work, IGO and NGO content is incredibly important around the world, especially, and making sure that we're sort of raising that content up as trusted sources of information as well. I also think that just sort of on a fundamental level, when we think about, particularly in the sort of more localized government space, how do we best connect local government and constituents? A big part of that, and a huge piece of the piece my team works on, is how do we make it easier for local government to connect with their constituents. But another huge piece of that is how do we make it easier for civil society, for local nonprofits and organizing groups to organize and petition and change their governments, right? I think it's absolutely a two-way street. And so that other half of the street we haven't talked about a lot today, but I think it's also really critical, right? How can we both raise up civil society and build for them tools that better help them advocate for change within their own systems and or otherwise just support their communities better?
Super, thank you. Okay, we have 2 more minutes and there are 2 questions in the chat. So I'm going to give you all 30 seconds to answer both questions and share any closing comments. One question from Teddy at Meta. What do you think is going to be the big new thing, trend, or idea in civic engagement in 2022? And then again from Natasha at ICNL, trying to shorten this, how do we increase in areas where there wasn't much public participation in deliberative processes? What cool applications of technology have we seen in the virtual sort of COVID era where that has increased, right? Like we haven't replicated a process that was already there, but we've actually used technology to increase public participation in a process. So let's start with Eva because she's already highlighted, and then we'll go to Robin and Dave.
Great. So in terms of trends, I think something I'm really excited about is sort of localization as we roll into 2022. I think we're starting to pay more attention to sort of how hyper-local governments impact people's day-to-day lives. And I think, well, it's an area of scale that companies oftentimes haven't paid attention to. I think it's something that folks are focusing on more, and I'm really excited to see how we can sort of help those governments that are closest to the people that they represent better communicate with them. So I think that's a trend I'm really excited about. And then in terms of sort of things that I hope might carry on that might have been new during the pandemic, I think one of my personal favorites was just, I think we talked a lot about transparency earlier, but I think one of the things I'm really excited about in digitization, particularly in the US, has been accessibility. City council meetings are usually at 7 p.m. On a Tuesday night. If you have childcare responsibilities, if you do shift work, that was never a thing that you could go to, you could attend, or you could participate in. And putting that kind of a meeting on live where you can ask questions in the comment section opens up that sort of participation, particularly in local government, to a set of people for whom it was just sort of institutionally closed off on based on time and structure. And so that's something, that accessibility component, that I am really, really excited and hope that we will see government sort of continue to bring those diverse voices in as we move forward from this.
Awesome, thank you. I like this optimistic end. Robin, over to you.
I'd actually like to continue. I'd like to continue Eva's her line of thought on this, and that is, I think that in the end of the day, the idea of accessibility, and again, there's accessibility for people who have disabilities, and accessibility for the whole public in general, and then you have a combination of both. And being able to make the parliament more accessible and thinking in terms of that, always having that really as the vision of trying to see how the Knesset can reach really every citizen, and how every citizen can have some way of being able to participate, and not necessarily only through the parliamentary members. And that's, again, it's a challenge. We've done this in the past. We've had committee meetings that were open to the public. It was before its time. We're talking about in the early 2000s, way before its time. People really did not know what to do with it. It was always the same 5 people participating in all of the committee meetings, so that didn't really work out too well. But now we have new platforms that we can try to bring that idea back and see how we can get more public engagement in the parliamentary process. That's awesome. What I would like.
Dave, over to you.
Yeah, just real quick to pick up exactly on the 2 things that Eva and Robin were saying. More local participation, maybe decreasing the barrier to entry on participating in government virtually. So it's a big ask to have somebody come and like speak at a county board meeting, but it's not a big ask to have them report a pothole online, right? And I can do that locally now and I couldn't do it 2 years ago. And that is a great example of like where things are moving. The more these micro participation opportunities where I can virtually participate in my government gets me used to the idea and makes it more feasible and accessible moving forward. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eva, Robin, Dave. This has been fantastic. Thank you, D4D Coalition, and all of our partners in the coalition. Huge thanks to all of you who have paid attention and stayed throughout this. I know we're a couple of minutes late. And final huge thank you to Amanda Zink, who conceived of this whole project and then executed it just beautifully. So again, thanks very much. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you.